Welcome back everybody, I'm Nick930, and today we're going to take another look at one of BenQ's projectors. This time, the latest version of their signature 4K gaming projector, the X3100i. Now, some of you might recall I did a projector review last year for BenQ's previous model, the X3000i. And in that review, I noted that it's a very good device, capable of playing pretty much any game or movie you want with little to no visual sacrifices. It's 4K capable, using a pixel shifting technique to achieve what they call true 4K, HDR capable, and because it's a projector, the image size can be massive, making any games, new or old, look far more impressive than you'd probably get on a traditional backlit panel. Since that video, I've installed that old projector using BenQ's ceiling mounting setup, which has freed up a lot more floor space and given the area a much cleaner look. And for the most part, I've been pretty content with the projector, despite its few technical shortcomings, like its lack of the more modern HDMI 2.1 inputs that newer TVs have been making use of. This means the projector can't output certain games at 4K resolutions above 60 frames per second, and it also can't take advantage of things like variable refresh rate either. But aside from this, and the obvious requirement to have a really dark gaming space to properly enjoy the projector, the BenQ x3000i has been an awesome addition to my setup. So the question today is, how does BenQ's newest projector, the BenQ x3100i, compare to its older sibling? And is it worth spending roughly $400 more for the newest model? Well, to answer this, let's start by talking about the general form factor of the unit itself. So right away, the first thing you'll notice here is just how similar this design is to the last projector. In fact, in most areas, I'm positive the components that make up the projector are identical. There have been a few minor tweaks and refinements though, mainly used to incorporate new mechanical features that the X3000 doesn't have. Like before, the overall unit is very cube-like, measuring 10 inches wide, 7 inches tall, and 10 inches deep. It weighs a little bit more, at nearly 15 pounds over the previous 14 pounds, and can be placed right side up for ground-mounted projectors, or inverted and ceiling-mounted, which I'd highly recommend. For the purpose of this video, I'll be keeping the new projector right side up, placed on a table directly under the old X3000i, as this will allow me to compare brightness levels and image quality. Though, if you do decide to get the X3100i, it can be mounted on the ceiling in the same way, and is even compatible with the same ceiling mounts. The projector once again is only available in a white matte finish, with a smooth plastic front panel and corner mounted lens. Though one interesting change here is that instead of blocking the lens with a transparent plastic casing, the X3100i's lens is unobstructed, allowing for more direct access to the projector lens itself. Also new to the X3100i is the much needed vertical lens shift knob that can be used to raise or lower the projected image 40 to 60%. This is a huge improvement, as the previous X3000i can be a massive pain to align properly. I've pretty much been forced to angle my old projector in a way that requires 2D keystoning in order to align the image with the screen accurately, introducing some slight input lag that isn't recommended. But with the new X3100i, you can easily adjust the height of the image, negating the need to angle the projector almost completely, and making it much easier to set up without the need for keystoning. On the left side of the projector, there's a built-in control panel which can be used to power on the unit, switch inputs, and navigate the menus. There's also an inlet with 2 manual adjustment wheels that can be used to zoom the image in slightly and focus the lens. This is virtually identical to the control panel from the previous model, and aside from a slight redesign to the included remote, this all functions about the same. As for the lens itself, the X3100i uses a familiar 4 LED system, capable this time of delivering an even more impressive 3300 lumens, 300 more than the previous model, making daytime viewing even more reasonable than before. I tested this even with really dark scenes in movies and games, and with features like detail adjustment, the image shows remarkably well in a darkened room with some daylight coming in through the windows. The image is not technically a native 4K, as it uses a pixel shifting technique to achieve its resolution. But the resulting image is incredibly crisp and looks fantastic when tuned properly. Additionally, because it's LED, the lifespan of the light will be considerably longer than more traditional projector lamps, with a 20,000 hour estimate in normal mode and roughly 10,000 more when the Eco mode is enabled. Though this latter option will of course impact the quality of the projected image, and I'd recommend disabling it if you want the best quality. Moving on from the lens, we have the rear panel that offers two HDMI 2.0B ports, one 3.5mm jack, one USB Type-A, optical, a VGA port, an audio out, and the main power input. Now, before I even received this projector in the mail, I was informed that this newest projector would not include an HDMI 2.1 port, which, as I mentioned earlier, prevents the device from taking full advantage of consoles and PCs running higher refresh rates at a 4K resolution. BenQ did say that they're actively looking into adding one to future products. However, they're basically waiting on Texas Instruments to release an updated chipset to incorporate this, as the current chipset used in these gaming projectors, when paired with an HDMI 2.1 port, would result in really poor input lag. They said in the coming year the newer chips should be available to test and manufacture with, but for now they've opted to stick with the standard HDMI 2.0 ports instead. Moving on, we have yet another HDMI port located under the top panel, which is used once again to house the projector's included Android media stick. Though this dongle is actually a slightly newer model than the one used before. It even includes Netflix this time, which you may remember in my previous review was not available by default for the X3000i. For sound, the X3100i uses an identical setup as before. The projector has a pair of internal 5-watt speakers powered by Trevolo that are okay, but I'd still advise linking your projector to a proper sound setup, using either the HDMI eARC, 3.5mm audio jack, or an optical cable. Once you're happy with the sound setup, we then have the simple process of setting up the projector itself. Because the X3100i and the X3000i are nearly identical, setup between them is virtually the same. Simply measure out the distance from the screen based on the size image that you want to project, preferably between 100 to 150 inches, adjust the height, tweak the lens shift and lens zoom to fine-tune the image, and once it's placed perfectly, adjust the focus on the lens until the image is as clear as possible. So now let's talk about the actual image quality itself, starting with the internal settings. Like before, I didn't really have to do anything here out of the box. Color calibration by default is very good, with accurate colors, brightness, contrast, gamma, and saturation. Image quality is incredibly good when viewed in ideal conditions, with colors appearing bright and vivid, and on par with what you'd experience in a typical movie-going experience. The image is obviously not going to be as bright as something like an OLED panel, but with 3300 lumens at this throw distance, it still really lights up the space nicely. Like before, this projector is capable of 30-bit color with 100% of the DCI P3 coverage, though according to BenQ's own product page, it does have less Rec 709 coverage, coming in at 95% rather than the previous 98%. It's a minimal loss and honestly negligible to myself, but interesting nonetheless. Like before, I didn't encounter any issues like rainbow effects that other projectors can sometimes suffer from. Though you may have noticed some banding in the footage I've captured, that's purely the result of my camera's recording, which of course does not appear at all in person. In fact, all these shots appeared far better in person, with the colors of Leon's hair and jacket here having far less of that harsh reddish tone that my camera captured. But you do at least get a sense of the scale and brightness level of the image in ideal conditions. In less ideal conditions, the reconstruction of blacks and whites on the screen isn't quite as accurate, which is typical with any projector setup. If you're going to go the projector route, you definitely want to make sure you 1. Have the space for it, and 2. Can properly darken the space to remove any ambient light. The X3100i does a better job than the old X3000i in maintaining good brightness in bright conditions, but it's clearly not the best viewing option, and you may want to invest in some blackout curtains to really get the most out of your projector setup. For fine-tuning the projector's color settings, the built-in menus feature all the same options, though there are a few more preset picture modes for users that want a quick solution for setup, including more HDR-focused presets, and the removal of that annoying game mode from before that the old unit would constantly ask to switch to whenever you booted up a new device. And finally, we can't talk about a gaming projector without discussing its gaming performance. A big concern when choosing to use a gaming projector is whether the device will bring with it lots of input lag. However, the X3100i and its predecessor, the X3000i, do a great job of handling input lag, making the experience competitive with many standard backlit panels. When running at the ideal 4K 60fps option, you can expect anywhere between 16 to 17 milliseconds of input lag, about the same when playing at 1080p 60fps. But when using the high refresh rate modes at 1080p, you can drop the input lag by half, with around 8 milliseconds at 120Hz and an impressive 4.2 milliseconds at 240Hz. Personally, even at the higher 16 milliseconds, the experience feels great. All the inputs in games I tried felt responsive on the screen, and I never felt like I was missing beats because of the projector's performance. But again, for the more competitive players, the lower resolution, high refresh rate modes are probably your go-to. So overall, the X3100i is yet another solid choice for gamers looking to really experience 120 inches of Venom in their living room. Like its predecessor, it offers fantastic color accuracy, an even brighter output, and slightly improved form factor design, making it a little bit easier to place within the user's space without compromises. There's a small hit to the Rec. 709 coverage. It weighs just a little bit more, and with the exposed front lens, you'll probably need to be more careful about keeping the lens clean. But it's otherwise a decent improvement over the previous model. Now, is it a $400 worth improvement? Probably not. Yes, the image is brighter, which is very nice for users that want more bang for their buck. And the little improvements like the better onboard streaming stick and the vertical lens shift are all very much needed improvements that address some of my complaints from before. But the biggest sore spot remains the old HDMI 2.0 ports that prevent most projectors from being competitive with today's high-end TVs. But if you don't care as much about getting HDMI 2.1, then the BenQ x3100i is a fantastic deal. And despite being a bit more expensive than the X3000i, it's still a far better price to size ratio than if you were to try and buy a traditional TV at a similar size. Now, if you're interested and want to check out the new X3100i or their previous model, the X3000, I'll be sure to include non-affiliated links below to their website, which should offer more detailed rundowns of their included specs. But otherwise, what do you guys think? Are you interested in giving a projector setup a try? Or are you going to stick with a traditional TV setup? Let me know in the comment section, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this posted every week.